free to get up and quietly walk out. I just, I don't want to, we've got all these people that are here to talk, and I hate to cut any of them short, so they run over a little bit. I'd like for the panel that I put together to come up and sit on the stage, and I'll introduce them. Introduce themselves, and I'm going to introduce myself and show them sort of what I want them to say. I mean, what to include or not to include. No. I'll do a round and start. I am Anna Connor. I grew up in Columbus. I lived on Blanton Street about 1955. My father bought part of my grandfather's farm, and we moved there, and that happened to be right behind Hardee's where 74 and 26 meets. So obviously that's not in the family anymore. I went to Stearns, graduated from Tryon High School, taught high school for 30 years. And I'm going to let each panel member introduce themselves. Start with Billy.
Maybe help turn it on.
Oh, went to Clemson, you have to excuse me. Engineering, I wasn't like Garland. I'm Bill Smith, and I grew up on South Peak Street. All the poor people up there, or we the rich people, I can't remember. But anyway, I went to Stearns.
You're my cousin.
We're related, so I'll forgive her. Anyway, I grew up on Stearns, I grew up on South Peak Street, went to Stearns. Is that right, Nancy? And after that, I went on to Clemson, went in the Air Force, came back, and I own a business in Greenville. Thank you.
I'm Cleo Gear. I grew up here in Columbus and on the east side of town. Can't hear you.
Into the microphone.
That right? Yes. Okay. I too went to Stearns, and back then we only had 11 grades and only went for 8 months. And that was something that I kind of thought was a waste of time. We started in July and went to the middle of August, and then we got out of school for about 6 weeks. And of course nobody remembered what they'd learned the first 6 weeks, because back then everybody was picking cotton or picking beans or digging potatoes or something like that. But I worked at Tryon Federal for 12 years and retired for 3. And then I went to work at the Polk County Cooperative Extension Service. And I was there for 27 and a half years. And I've been retired for 10 years, thank goodness.
I'm Bill McFarland. I was born down on Peak Street in Columbus, on the corner of Peak Street and Sims Street, in the old McFarland house that has long since been torn down. That was in 1923. So I have lived in Columbus all of my life, except for the time I was away in the service during World War II. I was away when I was in college, and I went up, I worked for a little while before I went to the service in Wilmington, North Carolina. And then for a short time in Detroit, Michigan, after I got out of the Army. I come back, I went to Stern School in Columbus, and like Cleo, we had 8 months and we had 11 grades. And we got out for cotton picking time. We had cotton in Polk County. Now, I'm going to tell you folks something. I told our farm agent one time about cotton playing out in Polk County. And I'm not making any derogatory remarks against anybody, but I told Paul Carverson years ago at Kiwanis, I said, Paul, you know why we went out of raising cotton and picking cotton in Polk County? He says, no, says, I know what they say down in Raleigh about it and how it become where it was not profitable. I said, no, I said, we just got a lot smarter. I said, we found out it was a lot easier to pick a Yankee than it was to build cotton. So, then I went to Lenore Ryan College in Hickory on the GI Bill of Rights, went from Lenore Ryan in Hickory to Wake Forest College, which at that time was about 19 miles out of Raleigh on Highway number 9. And I finished law school there in 1951, came back to Polk County, and I've built a house on, they call it Houston Road now, it used to be Walker Street. And it's on land that was owned by my grandfather Newman. And I've lived there ever since, and I hope the next time I move, it's going to be out to the Presbyterian Cemetery. I've been a Presbyterian all my life. I have been an elder longer than I like to remember in the church, and we have a fine church, and I could talk an hour or two about Columbus Presbyterian Church. At any rate, I am here, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have. And I was here doing most of it happening.
I talk so loud, you know. I'm Harriet Walker. I was born in Green Creek, and when I was a year old, my father bought the farm a mile out from Columbus. It now, Hatch Mill is there. Hatch Mill bought my father's farm. I went to school in Columbus. We had no buses. We took our lunch. There was no lunch rooms. And I finished school at Stearns and went to Asheville Teachers College. Edna was there 2 years while I was. I'm older than she, as you can see. And I taught a number of years. Married Hugh Walker, and he was in the lumber business, and we lived in Florida and South Carolina and Georgia, where the tall pines grew. And then we retired and came back to Columbus.
I don't think I need this.
Yes, you do.
Do I?
Yeah. Just keep it right in front of your mouth.
Well, I've never used one of these.
Well, just try.
Anyway, I told Anna that I didn't belong on this panel because I was not born in Columbus.
In front of your mouth.
Live in Columbus.
And who is?
I lived on a farm out.
Tell us your name.
Oh, I'm in the letter. I'm Edna Leonard. I was Edna Hague. And we lived on a farm between Columbus and Mill Springs. Harriet was a suburbanite and I was a country girl. But anyway, went to Stern School, graduated there, and then went to Asheville Teachers College and taught for 23 years altogether. I had a little interim period there when I had 3 boys to attend to, so it was now about 12 years. And I've been retired for I don't know how many years. I'm not going to tell anyway. Now, what else did you want to know about?
Let Roy introduce himself.
Good afternoon, my name is Roy Case, and I was born in Polk County. My birth certificate only says that. My parents lived somewhere near Columbus when I was born, and I was born in the old St. Luke's Hospital in Tryon. We lived around Columbus, in and out of town, in and out of the city limits most all of my life. Bill was talking about the house that he lived in down there on South Peak Street. It was on the opposite corner from where I live now, and I now live in the house that Billy Smith grew up in. It's on the corner of Peak Street and Sims also. But when we first moved back into town, the first time I could remember living in Columbus, I joined the Columbus Baptist Church. I had been a member in Midway. We lived out there for a couple of years, and went to church there for several years. And I went to join the Air Force after I went to Stern School, and then Tryon High School. And I went in the military, went in the Air Force and spent four years in there, 1.5 years of that in Korea. Came back, went to Cecil's Business School in Spartanburg on the GI Bill. In the meantime, I went to work for General Electric Company, and I worked there for 33 years, having retired in 1991. I am presently the mayor of Columbus. Thank you very much.
Okay. Polk County was first created in 1847. If things had gone right the first time, this program would have been called Growing Up in Skywigger, because that was the name, supposed to be the name of the town, of the county seat. But the leaders couldn't agree on where it was going to be and what it was going to be called, so the charter was revoked in 1849. In 1855, the legislature renewed the charter, brought it back, and due largely to Dr. Columbus Mills. And the charter was almost exactly the same, except they said, this time the county seat will be in the geographical center or within 2 miles. And it will be called Columbus. So there wasn't a lot of arguing that could go on about where it was going to be this time. 100 acres were set aside or bought from, for $1, John Hampton, John Modine, and Jonathan Newman, an area that had been known as Foster's Race Path in the shadow of Foster Mountain, which you may know now as Chocolate Drop. They had asked commissioners outside of this area, like Hendersonville and Rutherfordton, to make the decision so nobody in the county would have any interest, any conflict of interest over where the county seat was going to be. It was divided into 94 lots, this 100 acres. 7 were reserved for public, civic, and spiritual needs. Now, this is an unusual town in that, very few towns were actually planned from the beginning. Most of them grew up beside railroad tracks or rivers or crossroads, but Columbus was planned from the beginning. The streets were named for the commissioners. They were Mills, Miller, Walker, Sims, and Ward. The 6th Street, Peak Street, which of course goes down by the bank, was named for George and Glenn Peak, who were the surveyors. And the seventh one was named for John Hampton, who was one of the donors of the land. Mill Street was named after William Mills, not Columbus Mills. Nothing in the record shows when these were named, but they are in a plat that predates the courthouse, so they were named that from the beginning. They don't know if the commissioners decided to do that or if the court decided. The four designated lots, there were four designated lots for churches: Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist, Episcopal. Of course, three of them are there. The town of Columbus was incorporated in 1857. The first big building, of course, is the courthouse, and I think George there was a makeshift one built until the real courthouse could be built, and I think there's a picture on the piano over there of the first courthouse that they used until this one, the one that we have now, was finished in 1859. The money that the county did have was depleted. The funds were depleted in building the courthouse and the jail. So they rented out rooms in the courthouse to businesses, and they operated out of the courthouse, and this went on until the turn of the century. Now Edna is going to talk a little bit about some characters. Her father was it registered deeds for like 25 years?
And tax collector.
And tax collector. So she knows some of the characters that were around the courthouse, so we're going to have her talk about that for a few minutes.
She said a few minutes, but I've got a lot of stuff.
A few minutes. We'll give everybody a chance.
Just hold up your hand.
I will.
All right.
It has to be right in front of your mouth.
For many years, the Polk County Courthouse has been the heart and soul of Columbus and the surrounding area. So, growing up around the courthouse has been a big influence in my life. My father, William C. Hague, was a county official through all of my school years at Stearns and through college, first as register of deeds and then as tax collector, 23 years altogether. As I said, we lived on a farm between Columbus and Mill Springs, and very often we children would go to the courthouse at 3 o'clock to stay until Dad went home at 5. Sometimes it would be real rainy and we didn't want to walk the little distance from the bus, which we didn't have until real late. So that was just a fun time and quite educational. We spent hours exploring all around the place, even the bell tower a few times, and taking those breathtaking rides down the magical stairways that everybody talks about to see who could reach the bottom first. I don't think that would be allowed now, but in those days it was wonderful, wasn't it, Harry?
Edna dared me about a year ago to slide down the stairs. I told her I did well to walk down. I said I'd slide.
Wasn't really allowed back then,
My friend Opal Cloud, whom some of you remember, I think, and I pushed open a door one day that was normally closed and discovered the old abandoned courtroom downstairs, which later became the Register of Deeds office. I remember it as a dark, smelly place with old cuspidors still in place and with tiered rows of seats. Now, I don't know whether that might have been the part that at that time was a jury area, but that's the way I remember it. I brought this up several times before the courthouse restoration, but nobody paid any attention to it. Even Bill McFarland was asked by me one day on the street if he remembered that, and he said, no, I don't remember that. The courthouse was always courtroom was always upstairs when I was around. But of course, now you got to remember that Bill is several years younger than I am. So that explains it. Then I was vindicated. In the bulletin of July 24th, 1998. It says, in an old article found in the Polk County News dated July the 30th, 1925, sheds light on many questions about the courthouse. But this is the one I want you to listen to. The story outlines the plan to divide the original courtroom on the first floor into offices with communicating doors and replace the floors with hard oak. So it's true, and I think that the men who fixed the courthouse, what do you call them, architects and so forth, discovered that and put it in the book. I was full of joy because I was afraid I was losing it. Now let's see. You stop me, and I'll be through in just a
Couple
minute.
more minutes.
Okay. All the deeds, of course, were written by hand in those days in the big books in the Register of Deeds office. Each of my sisters and I had a stint as Dad's assistant, and it pleases me today to go in once in a while and look for my handwriting. I learned much about people in those days as they came and went to attend to their legal, political, and financial matters. They came to record land, births, deaths, marriages, and divorces, to attend court, and yes, to pay their taxes. This made for a lot of activity around the courthouse area, and you saw a real cross-section of the county's people. I'm going to mention a few people who stand out in my memory of those days. My dad's office was on the left of the portico, you know, I guess you call it a portico, out the cement wall across there. And on the other side was the clerk of court's office, as it was recently, with Heber Carson, John Arledge, and Robert McFarland are the ones I remember holding office at that time. Mr. Carson had a cute little secretary whom some of you would remember if I told you her name. She wore the highest heels, the shortest skirts, and had beautiful hair and face made up in the style of the late 20s. She was a real little boopy-doo. Many lawyers came to those offices, both the clerk of court and Dad's. If she happened to see a good-looking young lawyer go into Dad's office, she would come clicking her little high heels across the cement walkway and ask Dad to sign a paper or answer a question that her boss had to know about right then. She was a doll and smart. Mr. Frank Burgess. Now let me tell about Frank because his granddaughter, who is it back there?
By marriage.
Yeah, Betty Burgess. He had held several offices, always stayed around the courthouse a lot. He would pop in the morning sometimes, cheerful and witty, and with some mischievous comment on the day or the people. He was a big tease. He especially teased one of his contemporaries who had a justice of the peace office upstairs. This nice old man was ahead of his time in that he was always expounding his belief in evolution, long before it received much attention in the hinterlands. One day, Mr. Burgess met him in the hallway and said, "Mr. T, tell me something. If we sprang from monkeys, what happened to the tail?" Mr. T thought a minute, and then he said, "Well, Frank, I guess we just scrubbed around till we scrubbed it off." There was great camaraderie among the men of the courthouse, many pranks and innocent jokes. Among the people I saw most often were Sheriff Bob McFarland, Bill's father, and of course his little son Bill, who very often was called to draw members of the jury from a box. How did you do that, Bill? The jar.
Put all names in a hat.
And then Leroy McFarland, who some of you might remember, seemed to be an overseer of the whole building and a confidant of everyone, especially the secretaries. Sheriff W.Y. Wilkins, Sheriff Hines, Sheriff Westbrook, Mr. Scrivens, McCown, Vance's father, Jim Massenberg, Jim Shipman, Fred Hamrick, several Arliches, and Mr. Jones, Catherine Spivey's father. Solicitors were Clarence Ridings and Will Pless. Those are the only two I remember, the older ones. Now, I'm not going to go into all this because I've got a lot of other names. Now, let me tell you just two more stories, then I'll quit.
Okay.
Mr. Mark Cornwell. How many of you remember Mr. Cornwell?
Can't hear you, Edna.
Mr. Mark Cornwell. He was the oldest, is it Cornwell? Cornwell. Mm-hmm. He was quite old, was the only Civil War, or the last Civil War veteran in Polk County. And he loved to come to the courthouse during court days or any other gathering, and he would find himself a place out in front of the courthouse somewhere and sit there and tell tall tales about his war experiences with great gusto and humor. He was quite a character. Then I remember especially a fine-looking older man named Romeo Phillips, very much like a bewhiskered Kentucky colonel. He was my great uncle, and he was Charlene Owen's great grandfather. His job was to call court. He would stand at the top of the stairway, very handsome fellow, and with this loud, resonant voice would say, oh yes, come to court. What else does he say, Bill? But anyway, it could be heard all over Columbus. I remember that so well. And then Mr. John Weaver. How many remember him? Mr. John Weaver. He was a country fiddler. I'll stop just a minute.
Hold it in front of your face. Hold it up.
Hold it up.
He was the grandfather of Peggy Edwards, who taught for so long in the Tryon School, just retired about 2 years ago. He always received a warm welcome when he came to Columbus for the 4th of July or any other time. His rendition of a fox hunt with hounds baying and the hunters calling out, and also his imitation of a train, which was just unbelievably realistic. Phil Johnson does a pretty good job, but he was even better. His fame spread to New York, where he was invited to play on national radio. His granddaughter, well, I told you that. All of these people that I've mentioned, and many more, I'm leaving out a lot of them, were people that were among the good, solid citizenry of our county. And many of their descendants are still here today, carrying on. But that's another story.
Thank you, Edna. I would like for anybody on the panel now to just give us some sort of memory of the courthouse.
Well, I wanted to make one remark about and telling you about the deeds being recorded by hand. And of course, when I started practicing law, that was what I principally did, was search the deed records, and that's a problem you get back. And reading those deeds that were put on by in longhand, and I recall that she mentioned cousin Leroy McFarland, and Leroy worked in the registered deeds office, and he was in there one day just putting those records on just as fast as he could, and someone says, Leroy, he says, nobody can read that writing. He says, hell, he says, I'm not I'm getting paid for putting them on, not putting them on where anybody can read it.
Anybody else, courthouse? Anybody about the courthouse? I can tell you, when I was like 10 or 11, that was what we did on Sunday afternoon, was go to the courthouse and roller skate round and round and round.
I've slid down those banisters.
Any other courthouse comments before we go to another topic?
One question to Bill. Are those books still in handwriting, or have they all been copied by computer?
No, they're still there. The real old ones are still in longhand, and then they finally moved up to a typewriter.
I'm going to move on now to some other buildings, and I'm going to talk about a couple, and then anybody on the panel that can tell us about some buildings that used to be there, or even ones that are, that you have some memories of. There used to be a hotel in Columbus where the Columbus Fire Department is now. It started out being the Cavalier House, and then it was Columbus Hotel, and then when it was torn down, it had been known as the Boxwood Inn. I have a picture I'll put back over there, and there's a board on the piano that George brought in that has another picture of the hotel. And while we're talking about buildings, he has a lot of pictures on that board of old buildings in Columbus. And when my mom and dad first got married, they had an apartment in the Boxwood Inn. The next building I want to mention is the Cobb House. If you were coming into Columbus, at the first light, on the left is the Columbus Baptist Church. On the right now is a blank, empty lot. There used to be a house there called the Cobb House, and I have a painting of it. And the reason I asked the granddaughter of Mr. Cobb, who now lives at Tryon Estates, for a copy is because I do have some connections there. My grandmother came from South Carolina in about 1917 or 18 and took a test at the Cobb House. Mr. Cobb was superintendent of schools. Then if you had a high school education, you could take a test and be a teacher. So she came, took the test, and taught in River Cove for a while until she met my grandfather. But also, my mom and dad lived there when I was born in the Cobb House, and my 6th grade teacher lived there then, Miss Velma Swain. Now, I'd like to ask the panel to comment on some buildings around Columbus. Any memories you have of buildings that used to be or are still there?
There was a store building on the corner of the school lot, on the right-hand corner. And then across from that was a big barn. And there was another big barn just down from there, where the filling station is now.
We have a movie theater. We haven't talked about the movie theater. Yeah.
I asked Anna the other day, I said, well, did you know that Columbus had a movie theater? No, she hadn't heard that. Well, when I was little, I can remember running past that place because it was falling in. It didn't last long. It was located about where the Brick restaurant is. But at one time, that was before my time, I never got to see a movie there.
Buildings. Any comments on buildings?
Well, when I was growing up, there was no buildings on the right of Mill Street, which is where the Petty Building is now owned. I believe I see Mary, Dr. Petty's daughter, back in the audience. I remember when Dr. Petty came and built the building, which is the main building on the right going through Columbus, and he was the first pharmacist, I guess, that Columbus ever had. And he lived here for a number of years, and then right coming out of the Depression, he went back to Michigan and raised his family there. And although I think Mary maybe graduated from high school in Columbus, is that right, Mary?
Right.
And the son, I believe, also finished high school there, and he has a home in Columbus. So they're all coming back home, so they know what a good place my name on the ticket to run for political office. My family was always in county politics, so I have been county attorney, but I've never run for office. But there's lots of buildings that are gone now. There where the bank is, there used to be a garage years ago, and it was torn down. And then back of it was a store building, and across from that, where the Republican headquarters is now, was another building that was a funeral home for a while. And on, and you got all of the buildings on the left-hand side of the street was built within the last 40 years, and they were built on Ellen McFarland Hill's property, and we've seen lots of changes in Columbus, and I've lived through most of them. But I'm kind of like the old man that lived to be 100 and something, and said, well, Miss Smith, I guess you've seen lots of changes in your life. He says, yes, says, I was again every damn one of them. At any rate, I've seen lots of changes made in my life, and I've not been against all of them, but I've been against some of them.
Anybody else have anything about a building?
One thing that I remember was the grist mill. Uncle Charlie Owens would grind corn and wheat for people, and I used to pull my little wagon with my grandmother's corn up the road to the mill and get it ground. And the first time I ever did that, I saw Uncle Charlie dip in with a bucket and put 2 scoops or something of my grandmother's meal in his patch. I said, wait a minute, that's grandmother's. He said, well, honey, says, this is the first time you've been here, I know. Said, that's what I call my toll.
Where was that, Cleo?
The building was located about where Blanton Street is, right in that general area.
Right behind G&K.
No, back to G&K.
All right. Anybody else on the building? Do you have something, Roy?
Probably. Bring up one here that all of them will remember when I mention it. That's down there about where Columbus Car Care, they talked about cotton being grown in this area. Cotton gin was right there. Right where Columbus Car Care is. Another building that I didn't see the building per se. Part of the old building is still under been covered over now by acid, if you would. It would be right at the end of the building that Mrs. Truck's father built. It was the first car dealer in Polk County. Now, I doubt if many people in here remember seeing it. I did not, of course, but my father, Virgil Case, told me about it. There was a Buick dealer there in that building where Mr. Clyde Pittman used to have a garage. Now, some of you might remember that part. That was the first car dealer in Polk County.
You also the 4-H center, that's now the 4-H center, was a prison camp, and my grandfather was a guard there. All right, let's move on to education. Education. Frank Stearns came here from Ohio and started buying up property around Columbus and White Oak about 1888. Before he finished, he owned about 1,500 acres on White Oak Mountain and down into Columbus. He was very instrumental in the education of the area. He built a school and opened it in 1891, his own funds. Over the years, he built several school buildings. There's a picture of one of the first ones on the piano there. It was known around the turn of the century as the Central Industrial Institute, and they had dormitories for boys and girls because a lot of them had no transportation in and out every day, so they came and boarded. In 1916, Columbus School District approved bonds for construction of a new high school, and that is the building that you see at the Stearns Education Center now. And it was later named in his honor, not until after he died, because he didn't want to be honored. He didn't want to have his name on it, simply because he was modest, not for any other reason. The first graduating class from Columbus schools was in 1910. It had 2 students. In 1931, the state took over control of the school. The high school was in Columbus at Stearns until 1947. This tells you how old I am, but when I was in the 1st grade, the high school was still there. When I went into the 2nd grade, it was gone. If you lived in Columbus, you either chose to go to high school in Tryon or high school in Mill Spring. And maybe you don't realize it, but until 1960, the county had 4 high schools: Saluda High School, Green Creek High School, Mill Spring High School, and Tryon High School. And then all of those were consolidated except for Saluda in 1960. All right, now I want to ask the panel for some memories about school. Now, you got to look out for Billy, because he grew up practically in our house with my brother, and they've got some tall tales, but hopefully you'll be nice and not tell some of them.
Can I identify one more building before you go on there? It pertains to the Stearns name. There was a building that was sitting right where the Columbus old fire department is now. It was called Stearns Academy. It was a school for boys, a boarding school for boys. Eventually it was bought by a private individual and slid down the road there and turned around, put on Ward Street, and become a residence. If you remember anybody living in it, it was probably the Gibson family, because that's the only people I ever known lived in it. That was the Stearns Academy.
Right, I remember that. All right, now, education. Any stories about going to school?
Alvin put me up to most of those things, because first, Alvin and I went through, I guess, 12 years together before Alvin went in the service, but we had probably the best group of teachers. I think one of the things I look back in Columbus, you remember your family, your church, and your friends, and at Stearns, we had Eunice Cloud, who I guess was one of the few people I truly felt like if anybody could walk on water, it was Eunice. And then we had Hoyt and Marion McIntyre, which I'm sure everybody in this area remembers, and Catherine Fagan, and Velma Swain, and my Aunt Helen. Alvin and I personally made Aunt Helen go from 8th grade to 1st grade. One year with us, and of course, we were, in 8th grade, you had 1st through 8th at Stearns. And we just were, at that time, thought we were grown by 8th grade.
Anybody who's a teacher or knows a teacher, there are classes that come through that say, oh God, they're coming up this year.
We were years ahead of our time. Alvin got into pyrotechnics and rocketry. We got into rockets big time, and we made pipe bombs and stuff for when that wasn't, considered terrorist activity. We blew up most of his farm with dynamite. If you used it, then you could order, regular gunpowder through the mail. I mean, of course, we thought that was really cool. So Alvin was, NASA had nothing on us in those days, but that was an excellent school. Hoyt McIntyre, honest to God, if you did something, you knew that by the time you got home, you might as well fess up. Because they'd either get you at church, they'd get you at PTA, they'd get you on the sidewalk, Smith's Supermarket, so you'd come home and just start confessing, I did it. Then they'd say, what? But anyway, Stearns, If anything, anybody that believes that bigger is better, you should have gone to Stearns, because I think better is better. And the size of that school was just, and those ladies, and most of them were ladies, had a tremendous influence, on us. Because we were sort of hard to influence, and anybody that could do anything with us, those ladies deserve a lot of credit. And that's the reason people like Anna took early retirement, kind of people like me.
Anybody else on school?
I started the school in the first grade, and I was only 5. And that was back during the Depression. And they found out I was just 5 years old, and they sent me home to wait till next year. So I went home and I told Mama, I said, well, I can't go to school anymore. They've laid me off.
I went from the first grade on through the 11th grade, Stearns School. I had to stay 2 years in the second grade because I couldn't read too well. So I got 1 year behind in graduating in 1941, but our 1941 class is still meeting annually, and we will next year celebrate our 60th anniversary. And we had some, as Bill said, now those teachers that he talked about are some of them about my age, so that, makes me feel pretty old. But when I think about teachers, I still think about Eunice Stroud because she came there right after I got out of the first grade. But I think about Harriet Fagan's mother, Cousin Daisy Fagan, and she taught me, and I think about Marie Burgess, I think about Veda McMurray Talent, and I think about all those old timers that meant so much to me during my 12 years to finish 11 years at Stearns School. And it was a wonderful school, and you don't know anything about politics, I guess, until you get back to those old school days when some wanted it in Mill Springs and some wanted it in Columbus and some wanted it in between. It was one heck of a time during those days when everybody wanted their own school. And when our communities lost their schools, I think it was something that had to come to pass, but I think the community suffered for it.
Well, I started school a long time ago, and as I said, there were no lunchrooms. We walked to school, and no bus around anywhere. We had a lot of fun, though. We played games, and something like kick the can and tap hand and drop the handkerchief and such as that. And later, we had basketball and football. Well, the boys played football, and we had a wonderful time. We would have recitations and debates and a lot of activities in the school. That was one of the centers of our entertainment.
Anybody else on school?
I'd just like to say that the schools were really good back in those days. They had music. We had a music teacher every year that I was in school, and she really did something with us. We had the chorus, and it competed against Tryon every year. Well, we always wanted to beat Tryon, and usually did.
Roy, do you have a school memory?
Well, yeah. I remember all the fine elementary teachers that Billy talked about a while ago, but they were well prepared because I had gone not too many years in front of him. Anybody that put up with me and the head boys, they They were used to rowdy fellows. So I'm only going to talk about one in Tryon because I think if you mentioned anybody else with her name, it wouldn't do her justice. But we had a lady over there, Myrtle Baldwin, and if you looked at her, you'd not look at her crooked, cross-eyed, or anything else. She caught you looking at you, and looking at her, she'd want to know why you were. On graduating night, Bobby Head and I were walking down the hall, and he said some kind of remark to Mrs. Baldwin. I don't even know what it was, and he never would tell me. She turned around and she said, "It's not too late yet, young man." Now, this is just before the graduation was to start. It's not too late yet, young man. And that's the way she felt about it. I'm sure a lot of people in Polk County remember the name Myrtle Baldwin.
Yes, and have stories. Let me tell you one quick one. I had a friend who, after he graduated from high school, Miss Baldwin was great for detention, after-school detention, and she never forgot it if she had you down. This friend of mine graduated from high school, and the next year was back there with his father doing some plumbing. Miss Baldwin saw him on the sidewalk and said, "Young man, you owe me 2 detentions." Now we're just going to do miscellaneous. Anybody that's got any really fun things to talk about Columbus, I'm going to tell you a couple of things. Where, beside the flower cottage, the brick building there that used to be the pharmacy, was where the Hill brothers, Hugh and Guy, had their electric shop when I was little. And they had the first TV in their store. And I remember walking to town, and they had chairs in semicircles there in front of the TV. And that was the first TV I ever saw. And people were just fascinated. I can remember everybody just crowding in there to see that first television. And I'm going to tell one more thing, then I'm going to turn it over. I have to tell something about Cleo. Now, I don't know how she ever decided upon me, but she came to our house one day and asked my mother if I could, we could do an acrobatics act together. Of course, I had no idea what that even meant, but she taught me a routine, and Cleo and I toured. We did Halloween carnivals and Farmers Federation Day, and Cleo schools, yes. Cleo also does bird calls and animal calls. At that time she did. Maybe she'll honor us with one. Can you still do one?
About a long time after the Columbus Mercantile Company was there in that building for many years, and on the corner was the old Polk County Bank and Trust Company. Now, Garland's grandfather, Mr. Rippey, worked in Columbus Mercantile. My Uncle Ed Newman worked in Columbus Mercantile. Harriet and my sister Jeanette, who was about Harriet's age, used to work in Columbus Mercantile when they had sales up there. And there are some stories that went around back then about my sister and Harriet kind of teasing Mr. Hinton Thompson, who lived down in the county and was quite a character himself. And I don't know whether she wants to tell you about it or not, but anyway, we had some wonderful people back then, and that's all gone by. Well, Mr. Hinton was in there one day aggravating Jeanette, who was my sister, and Harriet, and they said, "Well, I guess said, what do you know about that? Well, the story was that Mr. Hinton and several people in the county was over at the Lynn Bridge. They used to hang out on the Lynn Bridge across Packlet River. And Mr. Hinton was telling about being up with the Wright Gaines, and said that Wright Gaines was performing on his lame leg, and Hinton Thompson was singing "Gosh dang Reuben, and I don't give a damn."
All right, anybody else have something?
This is just something that I've remembered. Our first fire truck in Columbus was only 2 wheels on an axle, and it had the fire hose wrapped around it. Well, one Halloween, there's a bunch of the boys, the real energetic ones, got together and they put that thing up on top of Ernest Gibbs' service station. That's where the Paul's barber shop is. And I wasn't there, but I think this one was. Then he redeemed himself as being a charter member of Columbus Volunteer Fire Department.
Okay.
I'm gonna tell you about another one that went on top of that building, and I was there. Mr. Ernest Gibbs had a service station in that building for years and years. And we thought he was a crowd. He was to us, you know, every time we went in there, if we took more than 30 seconds to look see what kind of candle we wanted, he'd tell us to hurry up and get what we wanted and get out there. But anyway, one Halloween, we decided that we brought outhouses uptown and put around some of his service stations, you know, and things like that. So this guy that lived right out of town, he said, "I'll tell you what," said, "my dad's got a one-horse wagon. We'll all get together and go out there and bring it home, bring it out here. We'll put it on top of the seafood is what we call it, seafood service station." Well, we said, a one-horse wagon. How in the world are we going to get it up there? Well, there was about 4 of us. We knew we couldn't pick that thing up and get it up there. We stood there and thought about it for a few minutes, and I finally made the suggestion that, hey, I've taken wheels off of them things and put grease in them before. We can tear that thing apart. We brought it out town, took it apart, put it up on top of that building piece by piece and put it back together. With the shafts, if you will, sticking off the front of the building. That way he couldn't miss it when he came in that morning open. So the next morning, Bobby Head was a paper delivery boy here in town at that time. He came out there to get his papers to deliver them, and Ernest asked him about that. And he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He said, "Oh, you do too. You're one of the little son of bitches that helped put that there."
We were going to do our Daredevil stage. Well, I don't remember what stage it was. Paul Smith, Paul verified it, but we still denied that because there was no pictures at that time. You know, there was no video, so we allegedly did that.
I was told that the principal got all upset and called my mom and said, "Alvin and Billy are out on the ledge at Stearns," and my mom said, "Tell them to get down." Couple more comments.
I noticed down under miscellaneous here, your church life.
Okay. But you can hold it down to 2 hours, can't you?
Yeah.
Presbyterian.
try to, but
Okay.
I'm not really gonna go into it, but I just want to say this. Town of Columbus did not happen, as Anna said. It was laid out. Each four corners of the original town limits, there was a lot that was laid out for a Presbyterian church, a Baptist church, a Methodist church, and an Episcopalian church. The Baptists and the Presbyterians utilized their lot, and then the Methodists come back later and bought a lot right next to it, if not the lot that was laid out. And Lucille Christopher's house is on the Episcopal lot. So it has always been a church-going town. Now, we Presbyterians were in the minority. The Baptists outnumbered us about 2-1. But Columbus Presbyterian Church, which was started principally by my ancestors, has certainly been a blessing to me. And I am proud of that church. I'm proud for what it's done to the town, for the town, and with the town. And of course, the other churches, the Baptists, I believe there's a picture over here. It shows all of the Baptists, which was a big part of the town that went to the Baptist church. I started going to church in Columbus Presbyterian Church when it was a one-room wooden building. Later we got Sunday school rooms. Then later the church built a fellowship hall, and then we tore down our new church and built our new sanctuary. And in the last few years, we've just built a what is known as Charter Hall. But Columbus has always been a town of God-fearing, God-loving people. And we have several other churches there now that have established themselves, and it is a big part of Columbus, has been, always will be, I hope. And I am proud of two things. I'm proud to be a Presbyterian. I'm proud to be a Democrat. I'm proud to be a member that's been here for a long time, and I hope that the good Lord gives me the strength and the courage to be here a few more years. I appreciate you coming out to hear about the best little town in the United States of America.
I think we will now open the floor for comments or questions. We have run over, yes.
Can I clarify one statement that
Okay.
you've been making up there?
2 or 3 people have said, talked about Columbus being laid out. It was drawn, but nobody's mentioned why Columbus was drawn. Anybody know? Columbus was especially put in here, designed, and drawn to be the county seat of Polk County. And that was the reason the people from Raleigh sent the commissioners in here to lay out a county seat for Polk County, who had been created by taking part of Henderson County and part of Rutherford County off down here at the foot of the mountains. And it was to create a new county, and Columbus was to be the county seat.
Right. All right, yes, sir.
I'd like to say one thing. I'm glad I come to Paradise and been here 5 years.
Just don't tell a whole lot of other
That's
people.
right. Come visit, but don't stay.
Right, right.
But I do want to tell you, when you talk about some of the foolishness, there were 3 of us name was Cousin Denny.
And you are?
No, when something happened in a little town of Canada, the principal called us in and said, I know one of you did it. And I bet some of y'all did.
That's right. Yes, JJ.
I want to share something of my memories coming back home when I was a young boy, and we'd go over to visit Uncle Will Hague over at the courthouse. And the sheriff's department had been active in fulfilling their duties, had gone out in the county and found the places of manufacturing. They brought in the stills. Some of those stills were fine copper workmanship. Oh, it was craftsmanship of top quality. But when they would bring them into town to store them at the county seat, they would take them in to the courthouse. As you go up to the courthouse, go to the left and through the door there and into the Register of Deeds office, and then you'd go back through to the back part of the Register of Deeds office, and the evidence was stored back there. And if my mother and father and the rest of us come over to visit Uncle Will, right after they'd captured a still, you knew the aroma. It would penetrate the entire office. And I remember so well the time that I commented on it, and Uncle Will said, John James, would you like me to take you back there and show you that? He took me back and showed me the still and explained to me what it was and how it operated and so forth. And that's one of the things that I remember from my boyhood days in coming to the courthouse.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Did you get samples?
No, I didn't get a sample. I haven't had a sample since.
Hey, I'm Leah Justice.
Right.
I was just wanting to know if any one of you guys remembers when you first saw on TV, like in a store on the street, like what year that might have been around now.
You know, I don't know about in the store. I mean,
No, you were talking about.
well, yeah, this was, I don't know when this was, late 40s, I guess.
1949.
Yeah, late 40s. That's the best I can do. Yes.
I'd like to say something for Polk County. My father and a friend of his started from northern Lower Michigan, Lower Peninsula of Michigan, at the northern part, and an old Model T, and there weren't very many very good roads at that time. And they came down through West Virginia, came across North Carolina, and north into Kentucky and Tennessee and on back. And Polk County was the place that he favored above all else.
And your Mary Trucks, and your dad built the Petty Building.
Yeah.
Yes, that's where office equipment and the newspaper office, yes. Okay. Yes, Francis.
This is a courthouse question. Mr. McFarland, when I was about 8 years old, I was asked to draw the jury, and just as you said, I was asked to draw names out of a hat. Well, I was so terrified because when I drew my father's name out of the hat, and he went up there, I thought everybody that went up there, if they went back and sat in this room, that meant they were going to prison. So I was terrified, so I started crying. But what my question is I never found out what happened to this Mr. Stokes. That's what it was. It was Mr. Stokes murdered somebody. I think his wife or something.
About our own one and only murderer, right?
Yeah. And I was so terrified that I never found. I got paid, I think, $2, and I bought my first Brownie camera. It was $2, but. What happened to Mr. Stokes?
He went to prison for life. He killed his wife and brother-in-law.
And wife and brother-in-law. Oh, my goodness.
Okay, any other questions? We are running way over. Yes.
I just want one, not a question, a comment about the courthouse.
All right.
I didn't grow up in Columbus. I grew up on Pearson Falls Road.
Oh, yes.
And my father came to every court session there was. And you would come home and talk about it to my mother, and I'd hear them talking and laughing. And I'd beg and beg to come with him next time. He said, you don't want to hang out with the kind of people you see around the next time.
I want you to thank the panel for coming today. They did a great job.
Yes, thanks to every one of you. Incidentally, I hope you'll bear with me a moment because I overlooked our curator, and I always give George a chance to say something about the museum. He always brings part of it with us. So would you like to?
Well, this month, when you read your newspapers, you can look for a new article in there, thanks to Harriet Sams. I won't tell you any more about it. You can just, I know you will know it, see it. You'll know it when you see it. And the things that we brought here, we did bring some pictures that Anna mentioned. We also have something else that may be very rare. We have a locket-type picture of Columbus Mills, the man who was instrumental in getting the county back again. And if they ever want to do anything with DNA, we may have the answer because on the back of that is a lock of his hair. So, be there to see.
Thank you, George. While he was, Aunt Mildred?
Yeah, I had something to say. I want you folks to remember that Columbus, yes, it's the county seat and everything, but it was a man from Lynn that got the thing through to Macon County, and it was named for a man from Lynn.
He lived in my most, right, what is now my most.
Yeah, Aunt Mildred always gets the last word. I've been handing out the only thing we can do since we don't have money to pay honoraria like some outfits do. So we give a certificate of appreciation for people who come and do a program for us. So of course I have one for Anna. And I thank you so much for putting this together for us. And I can't tell you what we're going to do next time because I don't know. But we will meet again first Tuesday right here and come back and see what we do next time. Thanks a lot for coming.